Okay, tonight we'll talk a little bit about maintaining Windows. Once you get it installed, the maintaining is the basic maintenance of these things. I've probably said this before, one of the things that you will know about Windows and hear about Windows is job security. There's lots of truth in that because there's always something to do to it. It is, again, much easier in an enterprise environment to maintain than some of the other operating systems. If you at home, whatever you want to have, Mac, Linux, Windows, whatever suits your need. But if you're managing hundreds or thousands of machines, it's very difficult to manage them via policy, except in a Windows world. What I always kind of thought was interesting is way back when NetWare, and NetWare is kind of a dying network operating system, used to be able to manage Windows probably better than Windows managed Windows at the time. Active Directory kind of fixed that, and it does do a really good job. How to set up and perform scheduled preventative tasks to keep Windows healthy. Windows does a lot of that for you already, because it sets up to do automatic updates. It sets up to defrag. Lots of different things are already there. So the big thing to me is the scheduled tasks, defrag allocation. We really need to do that. Unless you have SSDs, and you should not defrag SSDs. But being sure that you get the Windows updates. Those are the things that are going to be the most destructive. The reason they're the most destructive, and the situation is much more dangerous after the update comes out than it was before the update comes out. The reason is if the update comes out and you don't apply it, then all of the people that really want to do nasty stuff to you can reverse engineer the update to find out what it fixed, and then they know what the vulnerability was. So once they come out, you really need to get them installed. Why are so many things happening? Because people aren't installing the updates. If you're in an environment, in an enterprise environment, you may want to try it out on your particular software, particularly if you have proprietary software, because sometimes Windows updates can break things. It generally is not going to break Office, Excel, Access, those things. So you're probably going to be okay if that's what you have in your system. How to prepare for disasters by keeping good backups and using the data and Windows system files. When we're talking about disaster recovery, this is the one, backup. We've talked about, or at least in the first half of the course, we talked about data redundancy by using RAID. RAID is not a backup. RAID allows you to keep operating if you have an equipment failure. RAID is a wonderful, wonderful thing. A backup is designed for disasters. And when we talk about disaster, didn't turn it on, did I? When we talk about disaster, it's one of those things that you come to work one day, and it's not that a hard drive has failed. You come to work one day, and the disaster means the building's not there anymore. What do you do now? That's what disaster recovery is about. Can you recover from that? And not just the building being away, but statistics show that small businesses that lose all of their data, somewhere around 80-90% of them, fail within the next year. Backups are a big deal. Backup and redundancy are two different things. Learn how to use commands to manage the files, disk management, and these are command line commands. If you can use the GUI, you're probably going to be okay. When you start managing large-scale networks, you really need to learn how to use the command line. The reason you need to learn how to use the command line is because it becomes scriptable. And if it becomes scriptable, you can create a lot of things, do a lot of things really quickly. For instance, here, when we have a new start, how long do you think it would take to make in Windows? Made Windows users, and these guys back here have. How long would it take you to make 100 users, John? Well, John, he's doing the thing. Todd, how long would it take you to make 100 users in Windows?
In Windows?
Yeah.
I would say 3 days.
3 days?
Active Directory environment?
Active Directory, yeah, sure.
Okay. Maybe an hour.
Huh?
Maybe like 3 minutes apiece.
3 minutes apiece. And you're not going to make any typos, right?
Yeah, that's if you don't make any typos or anything like that.
If you can script it, typically you can get a database of some sort. You could probably make these 100 users in, I don't know, maybe a minute and a half. Actually less than that. So scripting and learning how to use the scripts are going to be important from a management standpoint. And you really don't have to invent these things, because there's a number of sites available. Microsoft even has one that has scripts that you can download and use for free. So we can do that. But how to use disk management, manage hard drives, we've done that already. Disk management, manage hard drives, you created RAIDs, and that's what that's really talking about. The difference between the basic disk and the dynamic disk. How to configure Windows to use language other than English. And that one's really not all that difficult. You just configure it to use language support. Where this is advantageous for those of you who are going to have kids one of these days that are in school.
Never passed that one.
I am too, but some of you will. When my son was in high school, the Spanish instructor taught them how to use the different characters in order to make the special characters that are in Spanish. What language support allows you to do is to say, hey, I want a Spanish keyboard, I want a German keyboard, and it'll have those special characters for you without having to install the separate language of Windows. It's just language support that will allow you to do those things. Preventive maintenance alleviates slow computer performance. I guess that is the case. It's going to help. It's kind of like doing preventive maintenance on your car. If you don't change the oil, remember the old guy, pay me now or pay me later. You're going to have to do it.
I remember that commercial.
Yeah, we're going to have to do some maintenance on the systems themselves. Verifying critical Windows settings. Clean up the hard drive, and that's probably one of the big deals. Check the hard drive for errors and free up hard drive space. And we can do all of this with check disk and defrag is really what we're talking about here in order to do those things. Windows critical settings, there is a command that won't come to me right at this second that will verify that the system files are still the real system files.
The SSC? No, it's not that.
What would be a real handy thing is if I could substitute my file for a system file, right? So it checks to be sure that the system files are in fact still the system files of the ones that are made, and they do that with file signing. Critical for keeping the system protected. That explain the importance to users that they don't change the settings. Verify updates and service packs are installed. That should be configured to allow updating. And when you guys do the install, you go to the drop down and it gives you a number of options. One is to download and immediately install it. If you do policies, and I told you about the Director of Academic Affairs came up one day and said, my computer just rebooted itself for no apparent reason. And the issue there was that it had done a Windows update. And the configuration at the time was to reboot immediately instead of wait to do the reboot. So you can do all of those things. I think that probably do it, middle of the night, whenever the system isn't all that busy. Antivirus software, scan regularly and do regular updates. set it up so that it does a hard drive scan occasionally. The machines in the school, since we have people that really love to do things like get viruses, usually inadvertently, there is a process for these machines at night. The first thing it does is goes out and checks to see if there are Windows updates. Then it runs an antivirus scan on the hard drive. After all of that happens, the machines get shut down by policy. They get turned on the next morning through the BIOS. At 7 o'clock, the computers come on. So we need to be sure all of these things are there. Be sure that the network location is set correctly, and that's the correct kind of network. Delete unneeded files. Windows usually requires about 15% hard drive space. If Windows runs out of hard drive space, it just quits. It does need to have the ability to swap files back and forth, and that's what the page file is about. If you're doing Linux, a swap file. Defragmenting drives will help. When I say defragmenting, everybody got that one, right? Mm-hmm. Yes. When we get the stuff distributed around the disk, the read-write head has to work harder to find the different parts of the file. Much easier to put it together. So it requires about 15%. If you do a defragment, it will say how much is defragmented and how much is free space, and it really needs this much free space. But we'll go ahead and do it for you anyway, if you really want us to.
Is there a need for any aftermarket defrags, or does Windows?
Windows should be fine. There are a lot of them. Most of them are free, actually, if you want to get a defragment. I think of what they really do is they draw you a much prettier picture. And Windows used to draw you this much prettier pictures. It showed you moving the files around and changing the colors and all that. They don't really do that anymore. Oh, yeah.
Show the blocks.
Show the blocks, yeah, and as they move down. They don't do that anymore. There's a lot of third-party softwares, a number of them free, that'll show you that.
Do it in real time, but when your computer is not being used.
Yeah, one of the things to do, remember when you are doing a defrag with Windows running, you cannot move around an open file. So the system files are going to kind of like be there. If you really, really want to do a true defrag, what you need to do is make something like a Windows PE environment that will boot to the operating system and run a defrag from it with the operating system not running. Defrag the disk as a disk and not as an operating system. Well, quicker probably because it's going to have the disk and everything's going to be there for itself. Check disk is going to be the error check, and check disk compares what the file thinks it is based on how much space it's taken up. That's what we're really talking about there, and a lot of times it will fix errors. We had an instance that a student came in one day and said, "Oh, my computer just died. Nothing will start. It won't start. Windows won't start." Well, let's try booting it to the media, running the repair, and run the check disk /R, the repair. It went through, found a number of errors, fixed the errors, and the machine ran just fine. Now, the recommendation after that is the hard drive may be getting ready to fail. You may want to replace it, may want to back it up and restore it. Hard drives can fail at any time. We know that. Move files and folders to other drives. This can be something that's handy. Things that you don't need on the system drive, put them other places. Pictures, videos, a lot of stuff. And you may want to honestly consider cloud storage in today's world for a lot of these things. A number of them will allow you, kind of, sort of anyway, to map drive letters to the cloud, and you can store them direct. Things like Dropbox, put them in the cloud, but they also store them on the hard drive. Stored on the hard drive is a good place to have it because you have better access. And if your internet access goes down, then you have the stuff there too. And when you do this, you free up the space to get back to this at least 15% of the hard drive free. Again, when you do the install, think about how you're going to do this install. You may want to take your hard drive, if you just have one hard drive, and and make part of it the operating system and the rest of it for files where you put your data files, your programs, and those sorts of things. So that if something happens to the operating system and you got to wipe it out, you preserve all of those things. If you have separate hard drives, that's even better.
Tell my laptop came with the SSD and a hard
drive. SSD and a hard drive. If you have separate hard drives, that's even better. We'll put the OS up here, and then we'll put the page file and the files down here, so that we have separate communication channels going to the CPU. The two things that are going to take the most hard drive activity are going to be the operating system reading the files in and the page files that swaps information in and out of memory. If they're both on the same channel, okay, the separate partitions is good. The preferred method is separate physical hard drives when we do those things. And you can manage the size of the page file if you want to do those things. Directory structure, the user profile namespace when the user logs on. A user profile is created. The first time you log on, it takes forever, doesn't it? Because it's creating this user profile, which used to be documents and settings for XP, and now it's C:\users, and it's in there. There is, when you get into managing machines on a larger scale, a piece of software that you may want to look at called Delprof. Anybody ever looked how big these profiles grow? They can get pretty big because that's all where all your temp files go. It's where all your caching goes. Delprof is delete profile. Be sure that if you get it, there are two of them. The old Delprof won't work on Windows 7. There's a new one that will. They'll delete the Windows 7 profiles. I'll tell you a story about that. When we used to have a work study here who loved to store everything on his desktop, and this is an ad for don't store everything on your desktop. The desktop is part of the profile. And we had a policy set up that when you logged on to a machine, it would delete the profiles. Well, you couldn't delete the profile of the user that logged on because you can't delete open files, for instance. So he had a machine in the back of the building that he always logged on to. And that's where he kept all of this stuff, it's in his profile. And I guess we were using roaming profiles at the time, maybe. Anyway, well, it doesn't matter. It was on that machine. But for some reason, somebody else logged in to that machine. So his profile went away. And all of the 8 gig worth of data that he was storing went away because he had stored it on his desktop. You'll also find out that when you start trying to share stuff out of your desktop, not nearly as easy if you just put it in the file structure when you do those things. So the profile is a collection of data and settings, 2 parts of the folder. The intuser.dat is where the actual information about the profile is. When we get into Windows, we have two things that kind of sound alike but aren't. Profiles and policies. I say they kind of sound alike because they both start with P. A profile is basically what your desktop looks like. A policy is here, can you install a program? Can you change the settings on your NIC? The policies prevent that. Policies send you applications. When we talked about how long is it going to take the Linux and the Mac to install the application on 300 computers, a policy would be what I would use to install it on 300 computers, and you can set that up in, I don't know, a couple, 3 minutes, something like that. But these things are all C:\user, username, and the variable, if you ever want to find that for the username, is %username%. Windows variables have a % before and after them. Directory structure, program files, program files where Windows stores it. These are areas that Windows makes. 64-bit, they're stored in program files, and then the 32-bit are in the program, the x86 folder. So We have two in the 64-bit version. There are two program files. One, the actual program where the 64 bits go, and the x86 where the 32-bit programs go. Directory structure, the registry location, C:, Windows system, config, backup of the registry in the regback. One of the things to remember about Windows is when you log on to Windows and you get logged on, it makes a clone set of registry entries, so that if something gets messed up during the session, you can recover from that. We had a network administrator many years ago put a new video driver on a server, and the screen went black. What now? What now? Roll back. How am I going to roll back? I can't see anything.
Safe mode.
Good question. Huh?
Maybe
Safe mode. Yeah, that would probably work. Shut it down, kill it.
Not working, want to just bring up the dialog box, or
Say what?
sometimes it brings up the dialog box.
If what?
Say, I don't know, detect something wrong with your video. Do you want to roll back, or I don't know.
No. Well, there was a driver.
Could you remote in?
Could you remote in? You know, we really didn't try that. You could probably try a rollback that way. What's the easiest thing to do? Download the good driver, safe mode, rollback, reboot again.
Yeah, because safe mode just loads the basic video driver anyway. It should work.
But when they ask you on a Windows test with the least administrative effort, last known good configuration. Because, led you guys right into that one, didn't I? What had I just said before that? What does Windows do after you get successfully logged on? Restore point makes a clone set. Restore point is something that you could think about too, but remember on this one, the example I gave you can't see anything right now. Speaking of that restore point, if you forget the password and you have a restore point, that's a way to get back to the old passwords.
That's why you do everything as password one.
So these things have a clone set that saves the registry configuration as is the last successful logon. Yes?
Couldn't you use like a USB drive with Linux on it to go in there and find out what's wrong and manipulate it?
Yeah, but I asked for the least administrative effort.
That's a lot of effort overall.
The last administrative effort is the last no. I wouldn't even have to use a Linux machine system to do that. I could go in and boot to the operating system. I could root to a Windows PE environment and get a command prompt. There's a number of different ways if you wanted to do that. But what's the quickest way to do it? Why not just shut it down and reboot it and load the last known good configuration, which is going to do automatically the rollback. It's going to put the last known good driver set on it. So you don't have to do the rollback there. Temporary file C: Windows temp is going to be there. Offline files are stored on these things. Offline files is kind of a neat thing. Offline files allows you to store network files on the desktop. One of the reasons salesmen travel and they update stuff, they can take stuff with them. When they come back and connect to the network, it automatically syncs the changes to the network itself. It's like a briefcase. It's like a briefcase that works. Briefcase never really worked all that well. But this actually does work. When you do this, if you do this, I would recommend, and this is just me because I'm pretty simple-minded, finding these things can be an issue, and they'll ask you if you want to put a shortcut on your desktop. Go ahead and do that so that you can find the files. So you can work on those things someplace else. The disk cleanup utility, yes, it's there. Anybody ever found it all that successful, all that useful? Personally, I'm going to badmouth it because I haven't either. CCleaner, if you haven't used it, free.
Use it for years.
We'll clean your disk up for you.
And it backs up your registry.
And you can back it. Yeah, it does a registry backup before it does it. It'll clean the disks up. It'll clean the temp files up. It'll clean the system files up. It'll give you back a lot of space. So if you haven't used that one, you may want to take a look at it. Say again? It cleans the registry. Yeah, it'll do a registry clean because registries get a bunch of junk in them too, and it will defrag the registry. A number of options are available in it. For those of you who are married, you may want to tell it to not take out, things like shortcuts in whatever browser your wife uses. You can tell it what to clean up and what not to clean up. Look at it before you just run it. Because then it comes back and, all my passwords are gone, and I don't know any of them. So be careful about things like that. Cache passwords, you can tell it not to delete those things, those kinds of things.
With you have the option to do a regular clean, a secure clean,
yeah,
a 7-time pass.
You're talking about for destroy, yeah, and you can, if you want to actually make files go away, it has the ability to do that are the NSA approved. And it's more than 7, it's like 32 pass.
You can write it on the recycle bin and it'll give you...
Yeah, and you can do that. Keep in mind that when we delete a file, what happens? All you DOS graduates. It's still there. It changes the first character of the file name to something, and the rest of the file so that, and it takes it out of the registry, or out of the directory. You can recover these things.
Tell it to Lois Lerner.
Huh?
Tell it to Lois Lerner.
Yeah. You can recover those things. Well, they claim that the hard drive was destroyed, and it may or may not have been. So this cleanup, this process of how you want to do that. If you're going to use it, I prefer, and this is just me, some of you also apparently CCleaner, one of those kinds of things. So this is the way it's going to look as you go through. The more options, programs and features, system restore, and shadow copies, when we look up those things you can clean up. System restore, Windows does a lot of things behind the scenes for you that will take quite a bit of disk space. So you need to kind of pay attention to what's going on there. Defrag, we've talked about defrag. If there is an activity to defrag these hard drives, don't. How's that? The reason is these are virtual hard drives that expand themselves. Well, they expand it, and there's lots of will it or want it, and I've never actually sat down to see what it really does. But nothing happens until you actually need that space. There is a lot of evidence that if you defrag, it will expand the hard drive. So we don't, and it takes quite a bit of time. I mean, you right-click defrag, you understand what defrag is, and we've talked about whether you need the third-party defragmentation software or not, and I think the answer to that's really no. And if you have the SSD, you don't want to defrag it anyway, because all it can do is do damage to it. Two types, the hard disk drives and the SSDs. Flash memory, this type of drive is not recommended, and in fact you can do damage if you defragment an SSD. Cluster, also called a file allocation unit, is a group of sectors, and let me see if we get the picture here. Yeah, it's here a little bit later. But we have, bad drawing, we have tracks, and in the tracks we have sectors, and when we put, how big is a sector? Anybody remember from DOS how big is a sector? 512 sound right?
I think 1028 sounds wrong.
512 bytes? Does that sound right? That's an awful lot of disk activity if you're going to store parts of files in something that small. What a cluster does is groups sectors together. and renumbers them. Everything starts with a 0 except clusters, and the first cluster starts with 1. Okay? Does that make sense? My bad drawing. Sectors are done. Sectors are the things that are written at the factory, low level, right? The factory writes those. The operating system creates the cluster or the file allocation unit.
At some point in the future, you think everything will just go to solid state?
Yeah. Solid state is where we're going to. What's holding people back now? Cost.
Yeah, money.
They've really come down in price
They
recently.
won't even teach this part.
Well, probably not. Well, it depends on how cheap you can get some really big storage. Because when we start talking about, 1,000 terabytes, how much is that going to cost you in solid state storage? Is that unreasonable for a big network when you're backing up, for instance, or when you're storing data?
Well, it depends on which network. Microsoft, probably not.
Yeah, I'm talking about a big network. This network, do we need that? No, we've got it. I know we, as small as we are, still store 4 to 5 terabytes. A file is stored in whole clusters, and one of the issues with the clusters is how big are the clusters going to be. You can fill up a hard drive by putting a bunch of little bitty files in it because the files can't share the cluster. That's one of the things a network could do. But if I have a 4K cluster and a 30-bit file, it takes 4K of storage to store that 30-bit file.
Oh, here we go. I had to look it up. The largest SSD that they show here is a 4 terabyte. It's $29,000.
4 terabyte, $29,000. So that's just what's the cost going to be for huge storage.
And a 1 terabyte.
So will it eventually? Probably. Is it going to be next year? Probably not.
1 terabyte's $450. That's not too bad.
Terabyte, yeah, 400. How much is a terabyte spinning hard drive?
I got mine for $99.
$99.
Oh yeah, I've gotten 4 terabyte drives at Best Buy for $180.
184. So 4 terabytes.
And what I'll do, I'll open the case and take out the hard drive.
So, and now what was the 4 terabyte SSD?
$29,000.
What do you think the business is going to buy? Yep. So will we? Probably eventually. Is it going to be soon? I don't think so, just because of the cost. Businesses only do things like that when it's profitable for them to do it. Files are deleted from the hard drive, and we do these things. They get deleted. They can be recovered until the clusters are overwritten with new data. And if we delete a file and we have a bunch of clusters here, do my clusters here, and let's say these are full, and I have a file that's bigger than that, we'll take these and then we'll go into the next set of available clusters. I now have a fragmented file. It's not contiguous, so that the read-write head can't go to one location and read the entire file. It has to move around back and forth on the hard drive. What we want to do is to minimize the movement of the arm of the hard drive, and that's what defragmentation does for us. Check the hard drives for error, searches for bad sectors on the volumes, and recovers the data in them if possible. And if you do this on the C drive, the system drive, it's going to tell you that you can't do it right now. Would you like to schedule it for the next reboot?
Yes.
If you do it on a data drive, it'll do it, but it will unmount the data drive, run the error checking, and then remount it. Click check now. It's checkbox automatically. Fix file system. Scan for the attempt to recover bad sectors. If you check the surface of the hard drive, which you may, it's going to take a long time, particularly for the very large hard drives. Uninstall software you no longer use. Oh, there's a real trick, right? Another program that you may want to get. Anybody use Revo Uninstaller?
Heard of it. I think it's
Free.
Yeah.
Revo Uninstaller. Uninstall software that you no longer need. The problem is a lot of uninstalled software leaves a residue. You can do that with CCleaner too, but this will do it as you go.
Revo also shows you last time the program was used or something, doesn't it?
Well, Windows will tell you that.
Yeah.
But it will go through and clean the registry and clean the files on the disk that the uninstaller left. And CCleaner, a number of things that you can do. This one you don't have to go back and run it while you do it. Just get it, and it's got a portable version that you can get and run Revo Uninstaller when you do this thing. When you get it, it says you want to install these things. It's a two-step process. First, it shows them to you, and then you have to tell it to uninstall them. It won't do it automatically. Move the data off the drive. Consider moving videos, the things that we talked about. Get them someplace. And when we're talking about here, we're talking about the system drive, the C drive, so that Windows has sufficient disk space to operate. The other thing that you can do is put the page file someplace else, either on a different partition or on a different physical drive. Again, preferably on a different physical drive. That's not spelled real well, is it? Page file. Page fill. Page file. These things don't work all that great, but it's better. Page file.sys, which you won't see by default. You have to tell Windows to let you see the system files, and it'll tell you. You really sure? I wouldn't do that for my regular users, but you may want to do that for your administrators. Uninstall and reinstall on a second hard drive. We beat that one to death. Virtual memory, the paging file, move it. We beat that one to death. Where you move it is in the system properties, same place that we went in order to do performance on your virtual machines. But now we're going to go into the settings here, advanced settings, and when we get there, we're going to tell it to where the page file should be. If you have enough memory, you may want to try it out. If you have enough memory, there's really probably not a lot of reason to use a page file. You can try it without it. I've done it on a couple of virtual machines. I did it on Windows XP virtual machines, and the virtual machines ran just as well with and without a page file. So we go into the performance options, and what this one, let me go back here if I can get back. We go to advanced, and then go to advanced. Crazy, isn't it? Advanced. Huh?
Isn't it settings in advanced?
Yeah, it's settings here. Performance settings, I think, isn't it? And then advanced again. Advanced, because we have the visual effects, which we've turned off, with the data execution prevention, and then we'll change this thing. You go over here and you tell it where you want the page file to be, custom, system managed, or you also have the option here, no page file. Say, well, it may not start without it. I think that if it won't start with that, it'll create one for you. Minimum allowed, and these are the recommendations. The recommendation is historically 1.5, 1 to 1.5, actually 1.5 to 2 times memory. And I think that what the new ones use is about 1 times memory, 1 times the amount of installed memory when we do these things. After you pick, if you change these things around, do set. If you want it to be a contiguous page file, which would be kind of nice to have, right? So we didn't get a fragmented page file along with everything else. We can go in here and do a custom size and make the big page file. The max and the min the same. It'll create a page. It'll create the page file that size, and it will be a contiguous page file then. Backup, extra copy of the data software file. The Windows backup for you and me at home is probably sufficient. The Windows backup for a large enterprise may or may not be sufficient, depending on what you do, how much you do. tape is still the predominant media for doing backup because tape's transportable. It is portable. Hard drives were not meant to be shipped through the mail, UPS, FedEx, or any of those other things. Tape, it doesn't really matter.
How big are the tapes?
The tapes can be huge, like multiple terabytes. If you go to a really large scale system, you're going to have reel-to-reel tapes, which can be very, very, very large. Even the cartridge tapes are now up to like 10 or several terabytes. I won't say 10 or 11 terabytes, but they're up to several terabytes. How much you're going to need, and some of them have a jukebox to where they fill up one tape, put another tape in. One methodology, if you have multiple sites in your network, is to back up from one site to the other site. That way you automatically are off-site. Backup should be off-site. Back to the difference between the data redundancy and the backup. The data redundancy is you come to work and the building's gone. Well, if your backup tapes were there, guess what?
They're gone.
They left with the building. And the building there, you could just have a fire in the knock. You could have the sprinkler system go off in the building, something as innocuous as that, and you can lose an awful lot of data. It doesn't have to be somebody driving a semi or flying an airplane into your building.
A sinkhole.
A sinkhole, yeah, around here it could be, I guess, right? Way to lose data: system failure, virus, file corruption, or some other. And the system failure is real. And I'll go back to the Windows updates for a minute and tell you another story. I know you get tired of the stories, but years ago, Windows Update came in, got installed on the Exchange server. What the failure was to read that before you install this update, be sure this other update's on. Well, it wasn't. Exchange server never started again. Now what? If we got a backup, we'll restore from backup. I will tell you that restore from backup sounds really good, really cool. Oh yeah, no problem. It takes a long time to do restores. Don't expect it if you've got any kind of significant data all to be back up and running in 2 or 3 hours. It takes some time to do that. Never trust important data to only one media. In Windows, we can have a thing called DFS, distributed file server, where we have copies on different disks, and those copies can be in different locations, which is kind of a handy thing to do. Planning for disaster recovery, and this actually is part of the security program. It really is. Decide on the media, decide on the software, decide where you're going to store the stuff, and even if you take it home, it's off-site. It may not be, quote, secure, unquote, but it's off-site and it will be available. Test the recovery process. This is something that we don't do and we don't like to do. And I've seen that before. People think they're doing backups. They're doing backups. They're doing backups. And the tape says, yep, completed a backup. They never try to do a restore. And then they lose something. Oh, let's restore the backup. And there's nothing there. So try it. You don't have to restore the whole thing, but restore a couple files. Be sure you know how to do it. Keep the backups in the same place, safe place, and check them. Check the tapes. The tapes will probably give you the tape. Software will give you an error if there is an issue. Tape stretches. You may create errors simply by reusing the tapes. Backup of Windows volumes, the system image. Points to keep in mind: the system image includes the entire drive on which Windows is installed. This goes back to, we kind of talked about this, the recovery disks that you can make to bring you back to the original install. If you make a Windows image, and one of the options on the Windows backup will be back up the entire hard drive. Make an image. You've just made yourself a system restore image with everything on it, not as it came from the factory, but as it is that day. So look at those things, consider doing that. Create system image, create a repair disk. I think there's some activities. These are the checklists which are in your book, so I'm not going to go through those. One of the things that you will need for Windows, one of the interesting things, and you notice here what you don't see is tape, and that's why you may need a third-party backup software. Windows doesn't support backup to tape anymore. If you've got a hard drive, and I think there are hard drives that you can add to the virtual machines that you have, you can back up to a hard drive that's on it, or back up to a network location. If you back up to a network location, you need to watch the configuration, because some of them, there's one configuration that only, and I don't remember which it is, that only allows you to do one backup. It erases the old backup if you need more than one. So be careful about those things. Again, another checklist. This is how they get so many slides. But the steps are in the book, and I think there are activities to do these things in the book. Create and use backup, system protection, automatically backs up system files, and that's one of the errors that you're going to get in the Action Center. If you don't do backups, you haven't configured a backup. They want you to back up. They want you to back up on a regular basis. Restore point. This was the one John was talking about, right? What's the restore point? Yes?
It's a point where if everything's good on your computer, you restore it. That way.
Restore. You can go back to a point in time.
Yes.
You can go back to a point in time in the registry. Does it affect any files that are on your system? You could actually make a virus go away, couldn't you? You're looking at me funny. This is a registry. Yeah. When we go back to a point in time, let's say that here we got a virus. A virus is typically going to it has to tell it to run, otherwise it doesn't do any good. Does it hurt anything if you have a file on your system that is a virus that doesn't execute? No. So we got this virus. What if we go back to this point before we got that virus? Its entry's not in the registry. Is the virus affecting us now? It's there, but nothing tells it to start. And let's go back to, I forgot my password. Let's say that I changed my password here, and I forgot it here. I can boot to the Windows Media, true? And one of those options in there is to restore. So I could go back to this restore, but now everything else that changed is going to go back there too, but your password, which is part of the registry, has now been recovered. There are softwares, back to Todd's Linux, there are a number of softwares that are available for recovering passwords in Windows. And we talked about, and I'm sure everybody went out and bought themselves a flash drive and started putting stuff on it, right? Tools on it, recovery tools on it. You may want to start doing that. Start collecting the tools as you go through the courses. A couple of you are almost done. You should have it. What are you going to do? Somebody says, hey, I forgot my password. I need to reset my password. Windows Password Recovery. There's a number of password recovery tools that are available. You should be able to put your flash drive in, boot, and say, okay, I'll reset it for you. Flash drives are better because they're more portable. It's a lot easier to put a flash drive in your pocket than it is to put 30 disks in your pocket. Yeah. Restore points are taken at least every 24 hours. And a lot of softwares, when you install software, you'll see one of the first things it tells you is just creating a restore point. Just in case it doesn't work real well, you can go back before that one is installed. Can use up to 15% of disk space. This is one of the things that's going to make some of our disk space go away. You can control how much disk space. The smaller the disk space allocated to it, the fewer the number of restore points you're going to have. You can manually create a restore point at any time if you want, if you're getting ready to do something. And the things that we talked about, like CCleaner, will create a restore point before you start doing that, just in case. Just in case it makes things that you don't really want. System restore, and you can turn it off if you want. I think if you can get into the machines here that the restore points are turned off. We don't back up individual workstations. If you want something that would be backed up, it should be in your home directory. And that's the way you really got to do it. Because can you imagine how long it would take to back up 200 or 300 workstations? And how much storage it would take? And what do you really need to back up? What do you really need to back up?
User settings.
Just your data. Because you've got a copy of the operating system, right? You can reinstall, or you made the system image of it. You can reinstall it. You've got a copy of all your programs. Is it going to be quick and simple? No, but can you recover? Yeah, and data is the thing that you probably don't have a copy of. Apply restore point, and again, the things that are there can affect install software and hardware user settings, because what we're doing is taking the registry back to some point in time. Points to remember about the system restore for fixing a device. We've talked about another number of things that it may do. Recovers errors. If the registry is somewhat intact, process cannot remove the virus or worm infection. It can't remove the files, but what it can do is tell them to not start. Might create new problems, and that's in fact the case. It might not. Might make changes to the system. A process requires restore points. Restore points kept in a hidden folder, on and on and on. When you do something, if you're even installing software, if the software doesn't create a restore point, you probably want to do that yourself. You can create them manually. Managing files and folders using commands in the command prompt. When you're doing a number of things in the command prompt, you probably want to be an administrator. The way you get to be an administrator in the command prompt is you can go to the search and type CMD, and it'll bring up the little icon, right click on it, run as administrator. Oh, we got that right, 512 bytes. Low-level formatting, we talked about that already, didn't we? So here's the picture I was looking for. Their picture's much prettier than mine was.
Yeah.
But it's too late. Partitioning, we talked about, do we need to do partitioning again? You've done it in DOS. We did it in the first part. The significance here, the partition, kept in a partition table. We have a master boot record, can be up to 3 primary partitions, also called volumes. The 4th partition uses the extended partition. And the extended partition goes back to DOS. From when they made drives larger, you could put 2 partitions on. At that time, you could put the system partition and then the first partition and then the extended partition. And at that time, we were limited to like, 10 meg or something like that? 2 gig hard drives. And each of the drive, what the extended partition will go here. The extended partition, we can have 3 primaries and an extended. The extended partition allows you to create drive letters. They're all in the same partition, but they have different addresses within that partition. Before it can be used, it must be assigned a drive letter. One of the things here that may or may not happen to you, happens to me occasionally, may happen to you here occasionally with a flash drive. You log on to your computer, you plug in your flash drive, and it says that it started up and it's been installed, but you don't see it. What happens there is there's a map drive. And the map drive overwrites the physical drive. It's still there. You can go into disk management and give it a drive letter. If you have the authority, you can go into the disk management and give it a drive letter. But that something like that may or may not happen to you. It's kind of odd when it happens. Like, where the heck did this thing go? I know it's there. It's installed. It worked on his other machine, but it doesn't work on the second machine. Depends on how many drives that we have on those things. The system partition and the boot partition, these are kind of named backwards. How's that? The system partition is where the boot files are, which are actually few in number. It can be a very small partition. And the boot partition is where the system files are, the Windows files. This is where the Windows folder is. The system files. The boot partition are the things, the boot files and the system partition are the ones that are needed to get the hard drive running. And it tells the computer where to go to find the Windows files. This one, usually C, needs to be on the first drive. This one can be anywhere. The Windows folder does not have to be on C drive. Typically, these are on the same drive. They don't have to be. Typically, they're in the same partition. They don't have to be. File systems, I think we looked at those. NTFS, exFAT, large external storage, which is still FAT, file allocation table. The difference is NTFS is a smaller allocation units. To me, and more efficient. To me, the significance for NTFS is the ability to assign permissions. So that I'll have to give John access to that file, or that printer, or that folder, or whatever else. The FAT, you can share them, but you can't control them with permissions. NTFS, you can. GPT is the same thing. GPT has the NTFS management capability. Anything in Windows that's greater than 2 terabytes, a volume greater than 2 terabytes, will be automatically installed as a GPT partition.
I have to designate my external.
Yeah, it'll do it. If it's greater than 2 terabytes, it'll do it. It says you have to, but the ones that I've done, it just said, okay, it's going to be a GPT partition. The command prompt, if you are in, and this one isn't, if you start at command line interface and you use this in DOS, I know, and it's got a number of things in it. If you are in administrative mode, it'll tell you right up here that you're an administrator in this thing. Commands to manage, I think that they've got a number of them that you can look at. Requiring administrative privileges will not work. If you do that, the elevated, you right-click on it. And it will say, here we go, here it is, administrator command prompt, so that you know you're in administrative mode. And if you're going to do things, a lot of things, if you're going to do anything that actually gets into the system, you're going to have to be in administrative mode. These are just, and I think I got activities. These are in the book. There's no need in doing those. CLS is the one that's really handy to clear the screen when it gets lots of information on the CLS. Get rid of all this stuff. Control break, control pause to terminate a command before it is finished. Control C will stop a batch file. Exit to enter to get out of the system. File naming conventions. I think we're just going to click through those because you guys did that in DOS, I hope. Except for Tyler. They didn't give him DOS yet. This is nothing that you probably haven't done. The file name and extension. We looked at the extensions and how to turn the extensions on. By default, the known extensions are not displayed. File name with spaces, like program files. I'm not going to spell it all. You need to put it in quotes so that it takes into account the space. Otherwise, it won't find those things. Wildcards. The question mark replaces one letter. If you have 2 question marks, 2 letters, the asterisk, everything else, all the rest of the letters. / question mark on any command will give you the help. And that's what this one here is showing with Xcopy. / will open the help about that particular command and generally give you some examples of it. MD, CD, RD, MD make directory, CD change directory. I think that I do anyway, a lot of times we talk about create directories. We should be saying make directories, because if you say create directories, everybody's going to do CD, which is not create, it's change. RD removes the directory.
MD can always stand for remove directory if you're not careful.
Yeah, MD is make directory. See, they did it here. MD creates. Yep. MD make directory or subdirectory if you're there. Delete and erase, rename. These are commands. There are, if you need these commands, there's lots of sites on the internet that have the DOS commands that you can find there. Manage files and folders, FAT, let's see, check disk. Fixes file system errors. What it does is compares the directory with what the file actually has. Talks about lost clusters. You can hopefully recover lost clusters. Cross-link clusters are ones that get linked to two different files at the same time. That doesn't really happen all that often anymore. In the earlier days of the disks, it did. And there was software that you could actually fix those with. Shutdown is a command that you may want to know. Do R restart, S shutdown, S and M blue light. If you're doing it, if you don't want to wait for this silly thing to time down the timer to time out, -T space 0 will immediately do. If you do shutdown space S space or /T equals 0, T space 0, it will shut down immediately for you. Disk management tool, managing partitions, when we look at that thing. And again, you've used this in the last section. If you put in the virtual machines particularly, and sometimes when you put a new disk into a machine, you have to go in here and actually activate the disk. So you may need to do that. And if you have dynamic disks, these are basic disks. We can shrink volume, explore, change the ladder, mark the partition as active, format, extend the volume, delete the volume. If you wanted to, if you have multiple disks and you want to create an array, we've got to go over here in the gray area and right-click that and convert the disk to a dynamic disk. It will allow you to do the clever things in it. Initialize the disk, and again, a bunch of 1, 2, 3 checks. Initialize the disk. For a new disk, MBR or GUID or GPT partition, and the GPTs are for greater than 2 terabyte when we do those things. Up to 128 partitions for larger than the 2 terabytes on it. Mounted drives, you can mount this is to mount a partition to an empty folder, and the folder does have to be empty. What we want to do, and this can be used to extend if your C drive gets full. That's never happened to anybody. Windows says that you need this much space. C drive never gets full, right? What you can do is take a disk over here and create a partition. And on your C drive with the folder, and I can't draw a folder, the folder is mounted to that partition. You can then move the files that are in that folder name into this separate partition, and it'll appear to be on C drive, but it won't take up the space on the C drive. What it really becomes is the folder becomes a gateway to get to the information, which is stored someplace else. Dynamic disks. Down here, better reliability, spanning, striping. Actually, that's stripping, isn't it? Should be striping. RAIDs, and when we did the RAID in the last one, you had to convert them, or they would automatically convert themselves to dynamic disk, where the clever stuff is. Better reliability, I guess. What I think, and this is again me, unless you got a really good reason to make it a dynamic disk, leave it a basic disk. Because if something happens to it, dynamic disks are much harder to manage than basic disks because the operating system manages them. The little partition, when Windows makes a little partition, we've got the boot files, but it always leaves extra space on the files. That's so it can put the management requirements in there to manage the dynamic disks. The reason I say that is way back when it was first available in Windows 2000, said, oh, this is really a great thing. This is a wonderful thing. So I made my C drive dynamic. It was a mistake. Because most of, and I'm sure it's changed since then, but most of the disk management software couldn't do it. I needed to extend it, do some stuff with it. Couldn't do it because none of the softwares recognized the dynamic disk. They would recognize the basic disks. But if you're going to use RAID of any kind, you have to convert them to dynamic disks. The disk management, and these are the messages you could get. Healthy, failed. Failed is if we have like a fail redundancy. If we have one of the disks in a RAID fail, it would show up as a fail redundancy. Online, active, unallocated space, formatting, basic, and dynamic. Offline, foreign, and healthy. If you are using dynamic disks and you take it out of one computer and put it into another computer, it's going to show up as a foreign disk. And it won't be usable until you right-click it and tell it to import foreign disk. And that's all there is to that one, but you have to tell it to do that. The regional and language settings for 7 Vista Ultimate and Enterprise, install the language pack. These are the ability, and all you have to do is install the language support. The ability to install language support for other languages, back to the when we're talking about the Spanish, where you have the special characters. You can put an other language keyboard on the system. And I'll probably ask you to do that on the last day of class. It is pretty straightforward. It's a pretty straightforward process. Lots of different bullets in this one, but preventive maintenance, regular things, the defrags, the updates to keep the system running. Be sure when you're in an environment. How many of you actually back up your systems at home with a true backup?
I use
a Carbonite. Use a cloud.
Yeah, Carbonite.
He uses Carbonite. Cloud's fine. I have a lot of mine. Some other place I don't use a backup software, but I use a cloud stuff too.
And Carbonite, now for extra money, they'll back up your entire OS.
A lot of people will back up for extra money everything.
Yeah.
What do you really need to back up? What do you really need copies of?
Your data.
How many of you own your operating system? If you don't, you can get it for free right here. How many of you own your programs? You've got them. What you need is your data. That's the thing that can't be reproduced by a commercial product. So plan for disaster recovery. Backups are one of the most boring things to do until you need them. And if you need them and don't have them, then you're going to be able to post your resume someplace.
Probably lost your backup to your resume.
Probably lost your backup to your resume. Yeah, your resume got lost and everything else. Commands, and these are the set helpful commands, directory, delete, copy, recovery. Robocopy is one that you may want to look at. It's kind of an interesting command. What it does is copy stuff along with the permissions. Disk management. Robocopy is actually what Windows uses in the backups. I know this was a long one. Are there questions? Probably just want to take a break, don't you?
Yes.
Did you have a question, Matt?
Oh, no.
Okay. Going once, going twice.